Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, hope you've all been doing well. In this video, we'll be discussing why I believe the next generation game consoles from both Microsoft and Sony will be delivering better price to performance when compared to higher end gaming PCs. Over the past month, both Microsoft and Sony have unveiled more details about their next generation consoles, the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 respectively. I even made a video recently where I talked about the specs and explained why most PC gamers would find the hardware intriguing and exciting as well. One of the things that was briefly touched upon was the fact that the hardware included was comparable to what you'd find from a high-end gaming PC. The GPU, CPU, and things like the SSD are components which you'd have to shell out several $100s for when building a comparable gaming PC with similar specs. Now, there's still a lot of information we don't know about the consoles. One, the most important aspect being the price of the next-gen consoles, which can make or break a product depending on how you look at it. Two, even though we know the specifications, performance and their capabilities still have yet to be seen in a real-world scenario thoroughly, apart from what was extrapolated from a few tech demos. Since the Xbox Series X has had the most information released about it, that's the console I'll be making most of my comparisons to. I also want to add that if you haven't checked out Digital Foundry's overview of the consoles, definitely do that as they have the chance to get a first look on the consoles and test them out in a few scenarios. When they talked about the Xbox Series X specifically running Gears 5, they mentioned that the performance they experienced was comparable to a gaming PC that had an R7 3700X and an RTX 2080 with the same settings. Now that is very impressive because even mid-range gaming PCs fail to meet that level of performance, and the GPU alone would probably cost more than the console. Now, speaking of prices, as I mentioned, they've still yet to announce anything, but we can bear in mind that traditionally, consoles have always targeted a market segment for the masses, even if it means selling the hardware at a loss, since they'll be making most of their revenue from software, subscription services, and other microtransactions. If the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X come in at around that $500 to $600 price range, they'll be offering impeccable value considering the hardware you're getting. When we briefly take a look at the specs of both of these consoles, here are the key specs to keep in mind. For the CPU, we've got 8-core CPUs that are SMT capable based on the Zen 2 architecture from AMD, so they're comparable to the desktop CPUs in some ways. Along with that, we have some very powerful GPUs based on AMD's upcoming RDNA 2 architecture. While the Xboxes appears to be more powerful, I suspect in most scenarios the PS5s won't be too far behind to warrant a noticeable concern. Both consoles with 16GB of GDDR6 memory, and we've also got SSDs in them with the PS5's NVMe storage capable of some very impressive speeds, 5.5 gigabytes per second of raw data throughput and 8 to 9 gigabytes compressed. Now there's actually not even a consumer-based NVMe drive out on the market that you can stick into your PC that will get you similar speeds, but I'll get to that in more detail later on in the video. Judging from these specs and the pricing segment we'll see the console's target, it's safe to say that trying to build a gaming PC this year with a similar budget that can attain the same level of performance will be next to impossible. Curious to see roughly how much a PC would cost with similar specs and similar levels of performance, I headed over to PC Part Picker and chose some parts out. Starting with the CPU, I went with a Ryzen 7 3700X. This is a great processor. It's got 8 cores with SMT allowing for 16 threads, and it's got a TDP of 65 watts, so it's very efficient. It boosts to 4.4 GHz and is based on AMD's Zen 2 microarchitecture, the same one that is used in the next generation game consoles. Therefore, CPU-wise, we have a processor with similar core and thread count, but is actually a little bit faster because of the high boost clocks. We won't be needing an aftermarket CPU cooler in this case, as the 3700X already does come with a Wraith Prism, which is totally sufficient for handling the 3700X stock or even PBO enabled. Now for the motherboard, I decided to go with the ASRock X570M Pro 4. Now it's not a top tier X570 motherboard. The VRM layout, while mediocre at best, it's still sufficient for a stock 3700X, but nonetheless it comes with a lot of great features such as Type-C, USB 3.2 Gen 2, and PCIe 4.0 support, which will be very important for our storage drive. Plus, the board is a micro ATX form factor that can allow us to use a small case and kind of copy that console form factor for the build. Now for the RAM, with prices coming down quite a bit from the last year, I went with the 16GB kit from Team. This is their T-Force Vulcan Z that runs at 3200 MHz, which will provide great benefits for our CPU. Now moving on to the storage, I went with a 1TB Corsair MP600 Gen 4 NVMe drive. This is currently one of the fastest Gen 4 SSDs you can buy right now that has sequential read and write speeds of 4950 and 4250 megabytes per second respectively. Now one of the major reasons as to why I decided to include a top-end SSD for this build, when I could have saved some money and gotten even a 2.5-inch SATA SSD, is because both consoles are now shifting over to NVMe storage devices. SSDs over traditional mechanical drives haven't really done much for performance, and at most all they've done is just drastically reduce load times. Microsoft showed off the quick loading capabilities with their new quick resume feature on the Series X. However, if you had watched Mark Cerny's inside dive on the PS5, he mentioned that the highest demand from developers he spoke to said they would like to see an SSD for the next gen consoles. In the manner of which Mark talked about the SSD for their next gen consoles, it really seemed like they wanted to leverage those high speeds to a lot more than just decrease load times and, impact performance. There's definitely a lot of untapped potential for these SSDs. Data and assets could be streamed instantaneously with extremely large storage devices in mind. Games could be developed with extremely large expansive worlds, but not just large, but more interactive, more lifelike. I think with next gen, we'll probably be seeing a new paradigm shift with developers using NVMe devices to code their games for. So that's why it's really important that we include a fast SSD in our build. The merits to having such a fast medium of storage, apart from just blazing fast load times, have yet to be seen. Now for the graphics card, we've got an MSI GeForce RTX 2080 Super. This is their Ventus model, which is a decent open air cooler, should work well in a system like this. Now both consoles boasting GPUs in that 10 to 12 teraflop range based on AMD's upcoming RDNA 2 architecture should mean that these consoles will be delivering performance on par with these high-end GPUs. As I had mentioned earlier in the video, Digital Foundry got to play around with an unoptimized port of Gears 5, and they said that they saw performance that was on par with the desktop's version. Now take it with a grain of salt, that's just one scenario, and most of Microsoft's first-party IPs are generally AMD hardware friendly. But this is really the baseline for these consoles. With such bold claims of 4K gaming performance, the hardware needed for that will have to be fast, and I do think with their collaboration with AMD, they will deliver. But I seem to be going off on a tangent now. This is more of a topic for another video, so moving on for the case, I decided to go with the Cooler Master Q300L, which is a mini tower that will accommodate all the components and work well with our micro ATX board, to give the system a more console-like appearance. A case is something you can easily change if you so desire. For the PSU, we've got a EVGA 600-watt GA power supply. This is an 80 plus gold rated unit, it's high quality, and should provide more than enough power for the system, and give us some headroom for expansions and upgradability. Now that we've chosen all the essential parts, the total cost for our next gen console equivalent build is a whopping $1,574. This right here could potentially turn out to be 3 times the price of a PS5 or Xbox Series X. Right now we're just comparing system to system hardware. This doesn't include the prices of a whole setup such as a TV or monitor, peripherals, cost of an Xbox Live Gold membership for example, etc. So obviously the upfront cost may differ in either scenario. However, just ignoring those things for now, I can confidently say that these next gen systems are going to offer amazing bang for the buck performance. Furthermore, it will be a very long time until we see PC builds that offer similar performance for the same prices. This won't be like the previous generation where the consoles were basically underpowered day one, and you had all these console killer builds for like $500 or $400. Considering it takes a $1,600 PC to match the performance, we're now back in that era where game consoles are offering performance equivalent to high-end gaming rigs. And I, for one, am glad, because this is only going to be beneficial to all gamers on all platforms. Developers will be happy and not feel constrained, and this will push for better hardware innovation. These consoles will also be pretty viable for budget gamers who want a high-end gaming experience but don't necessarily have the means to buy a high-end gaming PC. It's not just about attaining ultra graphics at 4K, but they've specifically mentioned support for 120Hz for competitive titles like first-person Twitch shooters. These consoles are becoming more and more PC-like, meaning they'll be more flexible for the user, and we've seen stuff like this in the past where games have offered a performance mode, where they automatically reduce some settings or resolution to allow the console to run at 60 FPS on the PS4 Pro, for example. Obviously, consoles are made with simplicity in mind, so they won't just bombard you with the large settings menu that are found on PC titles, but they'll give you stuff like targeted frame rate, performance mode, or visual mode, simple options like that to let their user enjoy the game how they want. With the market segment that these consoles target and the performance they're bringing to the table, they'll be very attractive. I, for one, am looking forward to the release, and I'm also really interested to see what kind of games we'll see upon release when they launch that can give us a first-hand look at what the devs can do when they're given such high-end hardware to work with in mind. But that pretty much summed up everything I wanted to talk about in this video. If you guys enjoyed this content, then leave a like, let me know your thoughts down below, check out the video description for ways to support the channel, and if you're interested in more content like this, then make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.